Elena Vasquez paid $100 for a Spanish mission that had stood abandoned for 70 years. The stone walls were crumbling, the roof had collapsed in 3 places, and the local historical society had given up trying to preserve it decades ago. But when Sister Magdalena Torres handed over the deed, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pen, and she left without saying another word, just crossed herself 3 times and walked away like a woman fleeing something she couldn't name. Elena stood there in the New Mexico desert heat, watching the elderly nun's ancient sedan disappear down the dirt road toward Tres Cruces, and felt the first prickle of unease crawl up her spine. Why would the Archdiocese practically give away a piece of history? And why did Sister Magdalena look so relieved, almost grateful, to be rid of it? The Mission Santa Inés de las Sombras sat at the edge of the Jornada del Muerto desert like a monument to forgotten sorrows. Its adobe walls had weathered to the color of dried blood, and the bell tower tilted at an angle that seemed to defy every law of physics and engineering. The wooden doors, massive things that must have weighed 300 pounds each, hung open on corroded iron hinges that screamed in the wind. Beyond those doors lay darkness that seemed too thick, too absolute, as if the shadows inside had somehow become solid. Elena approached slowly, her work boots crunching on gravel mixed with fragments of colored glass, shattered pieces of stained windows that must have been beautiful once, before time and vandals had reduced them to glittering shards that caught the afternoon sun like drops of frozen blood. The air here tasted wrong. Not just dry, which she expected in the desert, but metallic, with an undercurrent of something else. Something that made her think of the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair on your body stands on end and the world holds its breath. Her German shepherd, Reina, stopped 10 feet from the entrance. The dog had been trotting along happily just moments before, but now she stood rigid, every muscle in her powerful body drawn tight as wire. Her ears flattened against her skull, and a low, uneasy whine escaped her throat, a sound Elena had never heard in the 3 years since she'd rescued the dog from a shelter in Albuquerque. Not when they'd encountered rattlesnakes on their hikes. Not during monsoon storms that shook the windows of Elena's small house. Not when that drunk had tried to break into her truck outside a bar in Socorro. Not ever. "It's just an old building, girl," Elena said, trying to sound confident. But her voice came out quieter than she intended, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might wake something that should stay sleeping. She took another step forward, and Reina barked once, sharp, urgent, a warning. Then the dog backed up 3 paces and sat down, making it absolutely clear she would not be going any closer. Elena had never known Reina to refuse to follow her. Never. Elena paused at the threshold, one hand resting on the ancient wooden door. The wood was rough under her palm, worn smooth in some places by countless hands over centuries, but split and weathered in others. She could feel a faint vibration running through it, so subtle she almost thought she was imagining it. Like a heartbeat. Like the building itself was alive. She stepped inside. The temperature dropped so fast and so dramatically that Elena gasped. Not the gradual cooling of shade, not the pleasant relief of stepping out of the desert sun, this was a violent, unnatural cold that plunged at least 20 degrees in the span of a single step. Her breath came out in visible clouds, hanging in the air like ghosts. The main chapel stretched before her, much larger than it had appeared from outside. The ceiling soared 30 feet overhead in some places, where it hadn't collapsed. Shafts of dusty light fell through holes in the roof, illuminating portions of the stone floor and creating stark contrasts between light and shadow. Debris littered the ground, chunks of adobe, broken wooden beams, pieces of what might have once been pews or an altar. But the space felt empty in a way that went beyond the absence of furniture. It felt hollow. Waiting. Elena pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight, sweeping it across the interior. The beam seemed weaker here, as if the darkness was actively resisting the light. She moved deeper into the chapel, her footsteps echoing with a strange, muffled quality that made the space feel both cavernous and claustrophobic at the same time. Then she saw the walls. Every surface, every single inch of stone and remaining plaster, was covered in markings. Not graffiti or random vandalism, but deliberate scratches carved deep into the adobe. Thousands of them. tens of thousands. They covered the walls from floor to ceiling in some places, overlapping and intersecting to form patterns that made Elena's eyes hurt when she tried to follow them. Geometric shapes that seemed to shift and reconfigure when she wasn't looking directly at them. Spirals that went nowhere. Lines that connected to nothing. Symbols she didn't recognize from any language or culture she'd studied in her years as a graduate student in anthropology. But what made her blood run cold was their uniformity. Every single mark was carved at exactly the same height, 4 feet from the floor. Not 4 feet and 2 inches in one place and 3 feet 10 inches in another. Exactly 4 feet. As if whoever, or whatever, had made them had stood in one position for years, decades maybe, carving methodically without ever moving up or down. Without ever getting tired or stopping to rest. Elena moved closer to one section of wall, reaching out to touch the scratches. The grooves were deep, cut into the hard adobe with force that must have taken incredible strength or incredible time. Or both. Her fingers traced one of the spiraling patterns, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she felt warmth in the grooves. Not the warmth of sun-heated stone, but body heat. As if someone had just been here, just finished carving, and walked away seconds before she arrived. She pulled her hand back quickly. Outside, Reina barked again, frantic, insistent. Elena ignored her, too caught up in what she was seeing. In the far corner of the chapel, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of roof, something caught the light from her phone. Something metallic. Elena picked her way across the debris-strewn floor, careful not to trip on the uneven stones. The metallic glint came from a small iron box, partially buried under chunks of adobe and what looked like the remains of a wooden confessional. The box itself was old, the iron covered in rust and pitted with age, but the lock on it looked newer. Much newer. Someone had secured this box recently, within the last few years, maybe even months. Her heart hammering now, Elena worked at the lock with her pocket knife, wiggling the corroded mechanism until it finally gave way with a grinding click that echoed through the empty chapel. She opened the lid slowly, half expecting it to be empty, another mystery with no answer. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth that was itself yellowed with age, were photographs. Dozens of them. Maybe 50 or more. Black and white images, some so old they were sepia-toned and cracking at the edges, others more recent but still printed on paper rather than stored digitally. Elena spread them out on the floor, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged them by date, dates that were helpfully written on the back of each photograph in different handwriting. Photographs spanning more than 70 years, all taken in this same chapel. She could recognize the walls, the windows, the way the light fell through specific holes in the ceiling. Different photographers, different cameras, different decades, but the same location. And in every single photograph, standing in the exact same spot against the far wall near what must have once been the altar, was the shadow of a child. Not a child. A child's shadow. Elena's mouth went dry. She picked up the oldest photograph, from 1947, and held it close to her phone's light. There, cast on the wall with perfect clarity, was the unmistakable silhouette of a small figure, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with long hair and what looked like a dress or robe. The shadow was crisp, well-defined, as if cast by a strong light source. But there was no child in the photograph. No body casting the shadow. Just the shadow itself, impossibly present on the wall. She grabbed another photo, this one from 1985. Same chapel. Same spot on the wall. Same shadow. Identical in every detail, the tilt of the head, the position of the arms, the flowing shape of the dress. Another from 2003. Same shadow. Same shadow. Across 72 years, the same impossible shadow in the exact same position, photographed by different people who had apparently all found this place, seen what Elena was seeing, and felt compelled to document it before leaving. Or being forced to leave. Elena looked up from the photographs toward the wall where the shadow appeared in every image. The wall was empty now, just bare adobe marked with those same carved symbols. Nothing there. No shadow. No figure. But as she stared, she realized something that made her stomach twist with fear. The section of wall where the shadow appeared, it had no carved marks on it. None. It was the only bare patch in the entire chapel, a perfect child-sized silhouette of unmarked stone surrounded by thousands of scratches. As if whatever made those scratches had carefully, deliberately avoided that one spot. As if it was sacred. Or forbidden. From outside, Reina's barking changed. No longer an alert bark or even a warning bark, but a sound of pure, primal terror, the sound of an animal that has encountered something completely outside its understanding of the natural world. Elena scrambled to her feet, photographs scattering, and that's when she noticed the scratches. The ones nearest to where she stood, near the entrance, they were moving. Not much. Just a fraction of an inch. But definitely, unmistakably moving. Growing. Extending across the stone like cracks spreading through ice, except these cracks were being carved by invisible hands, worked into the stone with patient, methodical precision. The temperature in the chapel dropped again, so cold now that Elena's fingers were going numb. Her breath came out in thick clouds of vapor that hung in the still air. And the scratching sound, she could hear it now, a soft, rhythmic scraping, like nails on stone, coming from all around her. From the walls. From above. From below. Getting closer. Elena backed toward the door, her heart slamming against her ribs, her phone's light swinging wildly across the walls. The scratches were definitely spreading now, growing faster, dozens of invisible hands all carving at once, working their way across the chapel toward where she stood. And then, from somewhere deep inside the mission, from rooms she knew couldn't exist because she'd studied the architectural plans at the Historical Society in Tres Cruces, rooms that weren't in any of the original drawings or renovation documents, she heard a sound that stopped her cold. Singing. A child's voice, high and clear, singing in Spanish. The words were muffled by distance and stone, but clear enough to understand. An old hymn, something that might have been sung in this chapel hundreds of years ago when the mission was still active. Los olvidados nunca mueren. Los olvidados nunca se van. En las sombras esperamos. En las sombras permanecemos. The forgotten never die. The forgotten never leave. In the shadows we wait. In the shadows we remain. Elena stumbled backward through the doorway into the blazing sunlight, clutching the iron box with its impossible photographs. The moment she crossed the threshold, the singing stopped as abruptly as if someone had pressed a button. The scratching sound ceased. The unnatural cold vanished like it had never existed, replaced instantly by the suffocating heat of the New Mexico afternoon. Reina was going wild, barking and snarling at the open doorway, hackles raised, teeth bared at something Elena couldn't see. The dog's eyes were fixed on the darkness inside the chapel with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. Elena grabbed Reina's collar and pulled her back, away from the mission, back toward her truck parked on the dirt road. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Because she had the overwhelming, unshakable certainty that if she turned around, she would see something standing in that doorway. Something small. Something that had been waiting in the shadows for a very, very long time. She reached her truck and practically threw herself inside, Reina jumping in after her. Elena started the engine with shaking hands and drove away fast, dust billowing behind her, not slowing down until the mission Santa Ynez de las Sombras was nothing but a dark smudge on the horizon behind her. Only then, when she was safely away, did she look down at the iron box sitting on the passenger seat. At the photographs spilling out of it, evidence of 70 years of impossible shadows and silenced witnesses. Sister Magdalena had known. All those photographers had known. How many others had discovered what Elena had just discovered? How many had walked into that chapel, seen the shadow, heard the singing, and walked away with questions nobody could answer? And why, despite every rational instinct screaming at her to drop the box at the nearest police station and forget she'd ever bought the mission, did Elena know with absolute certainty that she was going to go back? Because something was in there. Something that left no footprints, cast no reflection, but carved its presence into stone with patient, methodical precision. Something that had been waiting in the darkness for decades. Something nobody could explain. But somebody had to try. 3 weeks before Elena bought the mission, Elena Vasquez sat on the floor of her studio apartment in Socorro, New Mexico, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the scattered remains of a life that had fallen apart in slow motion. The eviction notice sat on top of the nearest box, bright orange and impossible to ignore, 30 days to vacate. She'd already used up 27 of them. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, the screen showing her bank account balance, $347.82. That was it. Everything she had left in the world after 6 months of unemployment, after her doctorate program at the University of New Mexico had terminated her funding, after her advisor had published her research under his own name and left her with nothing but empty promises and a reputation so damaged that no other program would touch her. Dr. Richard Castellano had been a respected name in southwestern anthropology for 30 years. Elena had been a naive 28-year-old graduate student who thought her discovery of previously unknown Jumano Pueblo sites would make her career. Instead, Castellano had taken her field notes, her photographs, her GPS coordinates, and her 3 years of painstaking research, and published it all in American Antiquity with his name as the sole author. When Elena had confronted him, he'd smiled that gentle, grandfatherly smile and told her that no one would believe her over him. He'd been right. The university had sided with him. Her funding had been redirected to more promising candidates. Her reputation in the tight-knit world of academic archaeology had been destroyed by whisper campaigns she couldn't fight. No one would return her emails. No one would hire her. She'd burned through her savings trying to fight the plagiarism claim through official channels, and when that had failed, she'd burned through the rest just trying to survive. Now she had $347.82, 3 days until she was homeless, and a German shepherd named Raina who deserved better than sleeping in the back of a 15-year-old pickup truck. Elena reached down and ran her fingers through Raina's thick fur. The dog looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, completely trusting, completely loyal. Elena had found her at a kill shelter 2 years ago, hours away from being euthanized. Now it looked like Elena might end up failing her the same way everyone else had. "I'm sorry, girl," Elena whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Carmen, in Albuquerque. "Mom's asking if you're coming for dinner Sunday." "I didn't tell her about the eviction." "You need to tell her, Elena. She'll help." Elena closed her eyes. Their mother was a housekeeper at 2 hotels, working 60 hours a week to support Carmen's nursing school tuition. Their father had died when Elena was 12, leaving behind medical debt that had taken their mother 15 years to pay off. There was no way Elena was going to add her problems to that burden. No way she was going to show up and admit that she'd failed, that her big dreams of becoming a professor and making discoveries had collapsed into this, 30 years old, broke, and about to be homeless. She typed back, "Tell her I'm busy with research. I'll visit next month." A lie, but a necessary one. Elena set the phone down and stared at the boxes. Most of her belongings were already in storage. The 1 month she'd paid for would run out in 2 weeks, and then she'd lose those too. The boxes here contained only essentials, clothes, a few books, her field equipment from her graduate work. Equipment she'd probably never use again. That's when she saw it. The envelope, stuffed into one of the boxes between a sleeping bag and her old hiking boots. She pulled it out, confused, then remembered, it had arrived in the mail 3 weeks ago, forwarded from the university. She'd been so deep in despair that day she'd thrown it in a box without opening it. The return address was smudged, but she could make out, Archdiocese of Santa Fe, Historical Properties Division. Elena tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead and a smaller sealed envelope. The letter was brief, typed on official stationery. "Dear Ms. Vasquez, your name was provided to us by the New Mexico Historical Society as someone with expertise in Spanish colonial history and archaeology. The Archdiocese is seeking to divest several properties that no longer serve active parish functions and require resources we cannot provide for proper maintenance and preservation. We are offering the mission Santa Ynez de las Sombras, located approximately 40 miles south of Socorro in the Jornada del Muerto region, for private sale to qualified individuals with demonstrated interest in historical preservation. The mission dates to 1702 and has been abandoned since 1954. Due to the condition of the structure and our desire for expedient transfer, we are prepared to accept a nominal fee. If you are interested, please contact Sister Magdalena Torres at the number below. Time is of the essence. Blessings, Father Andres Montoya, Director of Historical Properties. Elena stared at the letter, her mind racing. A Spanish colonial mission from 1702? That was early, even for New Mexico. And they wanted to sell it for a nominal fee? That could mean anything from a few hundred to a few $1,000s, money she didn't have either way, but the word expedient stuck in her mind. They wanted it gone quickly. She opened the second envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on plain paper, the handwriting shaky, as if written by someone very old or very frightened. Ms. Vasquez. I urged Father Montoya to contact you specifically. Your published work on Germano spiritual practices showed sensitivity and understanding that is rare. You may be the only person who can help. The mission is not what it appears. There are things there that cannot be explained by history or science. Things that have been witnessed but never understood. The Church has chosen to ignore these phenomena for 70 years, but they have not stopped. They have only grown stronger. If you purchase the mission, you will find documentation hidden within. Others before you have tried to understand. All have failed or fled. But perhaps you will be different. The price is $100. Not because the property is worthless, but because no one else will take it. I pray you will have the courage others lacked. I cannot say more in writing. If you come, I will tell you what I know. If you do not, I will understand. Some burdens are too heavy to accept willingly. May God protect you, Sister Magdalena Torres. Elena read the note 3 times, her heart beating faster with each reading. A mission that the Church was desperate to unload. Unexplained phenomena. Hidden documentation. Others who had tried and failed to understand something. This was insane. She should throw the letters away, focus on finding a job, any job, that would keep her and Reina off the streets. She should be practical, responsible, realistic. But $100. She had $347.82. If she spent $100, she'd have $247.82 left. Not enough to rent another apartment, but enough to survive in her truck for a few weeks while she figured things out. And she'd have a property. Land. A structure. Something that was hers, that no one could take away or steal or publish under their own name. More than that, she'd have a mystery. A real mystery, not the sanitized academic questions she'd been trained to ask. Something unexplained, something that had defeated everyone who'd tried to solve it. Elena looked down at Reina, who was watching her with that patient, trusting expression. What do you think, girl? Should we buy a haunted mission with our last $100? Reina's tail thumped once against the floor. Yeah, Elena said, feeling something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in months. Not hope, exactly, but something close. Purpose, maybe. Or just the desperate need to prove that she was still capable of discovery, still worth something, even if the whole academic world had decided otherwise. Yeah, let's do something crazy. The next morning, Elena called the number on Father Montoya's letterhead. A secretary answered, took her information, and said Sister Magdalena would meet her at the mission itself in 3 days. Cash only. Deed would be transferred immediately. Elena spent those 3 days preparing. She withdrew $100 from her account in crisp bills. She loaded her truck with camping gear, her field equipment, bottled water, and enough dog food for Reina to last 2 weeks. She printed out everything she could find about the mission Santa Inés de las Sombras from online archives, which wasn't much. What she found was strange in itself. The mission appeared in Spanish colonial records from 1702 to 1755, when it was apparently abandoned for the first time after an Apache raid. It was re-established briefly in 1810, then abandoned again in 1823. The Catholic Church took it over in 1891 and ran it as a small parish serving scattered ranching families until 1954, when it was permanently closed. No explanation for that final closure. Just a brief notation in the Archdiocese records, property deemed unsuitable for continued sacred use. Elena searched for news articles, historical accounts, anything that might explain what Sister Magdalena had meant by unexplained phenomena. She found nothing. It was as if the mission had simply been erased from collective memory, a blank space in the historical record. On the third day, Elena drove south from Socorro into the desert, following GPS coordinates Sister Magdalena had texted her. The landscape grew increasingly barren, rocky plains dotted with creosote and mesquite, distant mountains shimmering in the heat. The road deteriorated from paved highway to graded dirt to barely visible tracks through the sand. And then she saw it. The mission Santa Inés de las Sombras, rising from the desert like a fever dream, its adobe walls the color of dried blood, its broken bell tower leaning at that impossible angle. Sister Magdalena was already there, standing beside an ancient sedan that looked like it might not survive the drive back to civilization. The nun was small, perhaps 80 years old, with a deeply lined face and eyes that held decades of secrets. She wore a simple gray habit and clutched a worn rosary in her shaking hands. "Ms. Vasquez," she said as Elena approached. Her voice was thin but steady. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain anyone would." "Sister Magdalena." Elena shook her hand. The nun's grip was weak, her skin paper-thin. "Your letter said there were things here that couldn't be explained." "Yes." The nun looked at the mission, and Elena saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Things I have seen. Things others have seen. Things the Church has chosen to ignore because acknowledging them would require questions we are not prepared to answer." "What kind of things?" Sister Magdalena pulled a manila envelope from inside her habit and handed it to Elena. "The deed. Sign it, give me the $100, and it's yours. But before you do, I must warn you, what waits inside that building has been there for a very long time. Longer than the Church's presence. Longer than the Spanish. It was here before we arrived, and it will be here after we're gone." Elena felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "What is it?" "I don't know." The nun's voice cracked. "No one does. We call it La Sombra Olvidada, the forgotten shadow. A child who appears but is not there. A voice that sings hymns from empty rooms. Marks carved into stone by hands that leave no trace. I have been the caretaker of this mission for 40 years, Ms. Vasquez. For 40 years, I have come here once a month to check the building, and every time, there are more marks. Every time, the presence grows stronger. Why didn't the Church do something? Investigate it properly?" Sister Magdalena laughed bitterly. "The Church does not investigate what it cannot control. We blessed the building 17 times. We performed exorcisms. We had the Archbishop himself come in 1987 to consecrate every stone. Nothing changed. So we did what the Church does best, we pretended it wasn't happening. We closed the mission, sealed the records, and hoped time would make the problem go away. But it didn't. No. It's getting worse. The marks spread faster now. The singing is louder. Last year, a vandal broke into steal copper. His body was found 3 days later just outside the door. Heart attack, the coroner said, though the man was only 32. His eyes were open, Ms. Vasquez. Open and staring at something only he could see. Elena should have walked away. Should have gotten in her truck and driven back to Socorro and her eviction notice and her ruined career. Should have chosen poverty over whatever waited inside that building. Instead, she pulled out the $100 and signed the deed. Sister Magdalena took the money with shaking hands and crossed herself 3 times. "May God have mercy on your soul," she whispered. Then she got in her car and drove away without looking back, leaving Elena standing alone in the desert with a deed to a building no one wanted and questions that had no answers. Elena looked at the mission, at its open doors and deep shadows, and felt Rena press against her leg. "Well, girl," she said quietly. "I guess we have a home now. Let's hope we survive our first night." She had no idea, standing there in the fading afternoon light, how much that building was about to change her life. How the discoveries she would make inside would lead to a confrontation with forces she couldn't understand and enemies she couldn't see. All she knew was that for the first time in 6 months, she had something that belonged to her. Something to fight for. Even if that something might kill her.